Well, I'm 61 years old and I spent 35 years in the city. I've been 7 years in politics, a few years in the army, and I thought I'd seen a few scams. But one of the biggest scams I think I've ever seen, and I think it's probably because it is the biggest scam in the history of this country, is the great wind turbine scam. They're not going to save the planet, they're not going to save the emissions of any serious CO2 into the atmosphere. It's all about, as so many things are, money. This is so rich landowners can put turbines on their land. This is all about Sir Reginald Sheffield. This is all about the Duke of Roxburgh. This is all about GE. This is all about E.ON. Some of the biggest companies on the planet making lots and lots of money out of massive subsidies. The people that are going to pay for this are going to be ordinary electricity purchasers, old age pensioners, ordinary workers. It's going to be put on their electricity bills. It's manufacturing industry who's struggling enough as it is to produce goods at a competitive world price. So what we've done in this short film is we've talked to real people about the problems with wind turbines. I think you're going to be absolutely fascinated by the next 20 minutes. And I think at the end of the next 20 minutes, you're going to be a lot better informed, and I suspect you're going to be quite angry.
The UK's green energy policies have given rise to the installation of many wind turbines across the country. This has led to criticism from opponents who argue that wind energy is not all that it seems. These views have been dismissed as selfish NIMBYism and ignored by the media and government. This film is about those views and why they have not been heard in the debate about energy policies.
This is Knowlwater Bridge. This is where the Fullerbrook Down substation is going to be. The turbines actually are going to be on the hill over there, and you can see how quiet it is, and rural and untouched at the moment. It was very poignant to me that they were going to destroy it by turning it into an industrial site, which is what a wind power station is. I decided to do a painting of it as it is now. Artists Against Wind Farms came after I'd done the painting. I wanted to do something, and it suddenly occurred to me that the one thing I could do was do paintings, and there would be people like me who felt the same. And there certainly are, and I found many of the artists I've been in touch with are very green, very concerned about the environment. Many of them lead very simple lives, and they're the last people who would expect to be on the opposite side to most of the people who are green, like the people at Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth, to be in conflict with the RSPB, for example, over wind farms. We thought they would be on our side, but they're not. We're having to fight them.
Tourism in Wales is tremendously important. It's one of the main money earners. It's more important economically than agriculture. And people love, this is very close to the Cambrian Way, people love walking over these beautiful hills. And of course you can see now for yourself that it's no longer beautiful. You can see the bare bones of the Cambrian Mountains, they're beautiful. But once you've got these man-made vertical machines moving in a static landscape, you can see how inappropriate that is.
There's 8 houses here, and 3 of my neighbours from the 8 houses now are on steroid medication for asthma, and 1 has a lung dysfunction, and all this has happened in the last 8 months. We never had any respect, and we're just thrown into the situation where we have 12 turbines directly behind our homes, and we're going to get 20,000 40-ton wagons pass by our house, unsheeted wagons that's going to create that many dust clouds, and our houses are going to be rattled so much that the plaster is going to fall off. None of this we were given any choice about. It was just going to happen to us. The gravel was used for lifting the roads, to level them off, to make them more substantial for the 40-ton wagons, and also the infrastructure that surrounds the wind turbines themselves. We weren't aware of it or the traffic until 2 weeks before Christmas, when they just decided to invade us, really, because that's what it's felt like.
It's another one of those myths that wind turbine developments don't affect properties, the value of properties, selling the properties nearby. We've tried to sell this property 3 years ago now, twice. And the first time, the buyer actually went to the chief executives of Denbigh and Conwy and was told I wouldn't touch that property with a barge pole. The second time, they went to the planning department, and in both cases they then pulled out, having lost all the money of the survey and everything else. They were both very, very keen to buy it. And so we don't believe it's the price. It's the fact is they don't want the uncertainty of what the wind turbines are going to do to the place. Basically, at the moment, this house is unsellable.
We're right in the middle of Devon here. My big concern about this wind farm has been noise. There's a high probability that we're going to get a real noise problem here. It can be the case that for example, you've got a wind speed of 10 metres per second at the turbine. So the turbine will be putting out its maximum noise. But at the nearby properties, at that same point in time, there are situations when there's actually no wind at ground level. So there's actually no background noise, or very, very little background noise to mask the turbine noise. And so the turbine noise becomes dominating and very intrusive at the property. If they used the conventional assessment procedures for measuring noise from wind farms, it wouldn't be possible to build wind farms anywhere near to people's properties. So what happened back in the 90s was they developed a special methodology procedure for assessing wind farm noise. If you get an occasional noise happens during a period of time, such as an aircraft going over or a dog barking or something of that nature, that gets eliminated from what is deemed to be the background noise level. So if you eliminate the peaks of that noise, the whoomp, whoomp, whoomp that happens about every second, the result is that the noise on paper appears to be far less than it actually is. So the people who are suffering from the noise problems can't actually prove there's a noise nuisance.
Pro-wind lobbyists have argued that wind power can cut CO2 emissions, and that anti-wind farm campaigners are concerned with their own interests rather than the need to find a solution to climate change. But wind farm campaigners' concerns are not only about what is happening in their own backyards.
I think most of the residents that I know of around here, have a similar feel, is that if they were going to save the planet, if they were going to provide a reliable source of renewable energy, if they were going to save a lot of CO2, we'd say, well, we don't want them here, but nonetheless we'll actually go along with them.
Wind has technical limitations. It's intermittent and unpredictable. You will always need backup, and that is from Ian Netz, who is a grid operator in Germany. The report's quite comprehensive, but that's one of the points in it. And from memory, I think it said 90% of all wind capacity needs to be backed up conventionally. To power this country, an energy source must be able to meet the peak demand that is required of it. And that demand goes up and down all the time. But the conventional power stations can ramp their output up and down to compensate for that, and that's what they do to keep the grid stable.
To cope with demand, different types of generators supply the grid in different ways. Nuclear and coal-powered generators, whose output is not easily turned on or off, supply a constant amount of electricity, known as baseload. In order to meet changes in demand, generators that are able to respond more quickly are brought online. But wind speed cannot guarantee a baseload, and cannot be turned on or off to meet demand. But don't advocates of wind power claim that it's always blowing somewhere?
That's quite true, the wind will always be blowing somewhere. But is it blowing strongly enough? They start producing at 3 metres per second or thereabouts. A 2 megawatt turbine at 3 metres per second will produce virtually nothing. At 4 or 5 metres per second, the output will be roughly around about 200 kilowatts. Bearing in mind a modern power shower is 10 kilowatts, that would be enough to power 20 power showers. from a 2 megawatt wind turbine. So if you carpet the UK in wind farms and you rely on those wind farms and you haven't got sufficient backup, on a calm day throughout the UK, there'll be no production of energy.
Wind power advocates claim that turbines can displace conventional CO2 emitting power stations. But the UK often experiences occasions where there is very little wind anywhere. Because we face the possibility of days without any useful wind, not a single power station can be replaced by any number of wind turbines. In spite of the technical and environmental concerns raised by critics of wind power, many governments believe that it can help them to meet ambitious carbon emissions reduction targets. But are wind turbines as carbon-free as has been claimed?
We asked specifically the Welsh Assembly government, and we, at a meeting with the Minister, we asked the Minister to actually instigate her own independent survey of the CO2 that her policies were saving. Unfortunately, the answer is that it's too early to make an analysis of the CO2 saving. And it is an irony. Here they are doing all the damage to Wales. When are they going to do the survey? And if the survey does confirm what we're suggesting, it's a bit too late. It's startling to hear that there have been no analysis of CO2 saved from wind turbines by any government in Europe.
Pro-wind lobbyists claim that wind energy has been successful in Denmark. But is this true?
The wind power industry always emphasized Denmark as the country of the fairy tale, where people live happily with the wind turbines. But it's propaganda. It's far away from the truth. It's far away from reality. All over the country, we have bitter conflicts between protest and action groups, authorities, and the big wind power companies.
The wind farm has been here since 9th of October 2009. The problems with the wind farm is that 2-3 nights per week we don't get the whole night's sleep. Perhaps we only sleep 3-4 hours, and then we are awake because there's so much noise. There are 12 houses for sale in this area, and the people come out and look at the house, but they don't ever come into the house. They out of the cars, and then they look at these big windmills, then in the car again, and then they drive home. No one has been inside the houses to look. No one wants to buy our houses. And it's for 30 years we have to live with this.
We have formed a national organization for neighbors to very big wind turbines. We are nearly 60 local groups. It's our opinion that all politicians today, they go in the same direction, just like lemmings. And they don't move to right or to left. They go over cliffs and they jump. And we think it's very dangerous, and it's dangerous for the society as well. I want a debate.
Denmark produces approximately 20% of its electricity from wind, but not all of it is used. 70% of the electricity produced by Denmark's wind turbines has to be sold cheaply or given away to its neighbours. So if wind power cannot supply reliable, greener energy, why are there so many wind turbines being installed across the UK?
They will be making a huge amount of money from subsidies. The company themselves tell you that wind turbines aren't subsidised, and that's because it works under the renewables obligation certificates. So technically it isn't a subsidy, but everyone in government and everyone knows it is an effective subsidy. But we're all paying for them, and we're paying an absolute fortune.
To promote green energy production, the government issue renewable energy certificates, known as ROCs, to producers of each megawatt hour of electricity generated from renewable sources. Energy suppliers are required to provide customers with an increasing proportion of electricity generated from renewables. To meet this obligation, suppliers buy ROCs, or they are fined.
And it is the ROCs that are the feature that is driving onshore wind. Without the ROCs, it would not be viable. And it's a good investment if you want to invest in energy technology, and you're looking at return on capital that you cannot get anywhere else. The investors are drawn to it for those reasons.
More and more people are realising how little electricity they produce and also how expensive it is, and that this is green tokenism at best. At worst, it's a monumental destruction of important landscapes like this, which we won't be able to get back. We can't recover them.
Critics of wind power have argued that it is not reliable, does not reduce CO2 emissions, and that it requires large subsidies to make wind a viable investment for developers. So why have governments made wind central to their energy policies?
This is a very windy country, so we have a fantastic amount of resource in wind energy, and we can potentially produce enough electricity to fuel 33 million homes. Now, we've only got 24 million homes, so this is a real prospect of us becoming a net energy exporter again, as we were at the peak of North Sea oil and gas.
It is being pushed by the demands to meet the targets.
That is why we're asking the Committee on Climate Change to consider higher targets for renewable energy generation.
They've signed up to European directives saying that they will have so much energy that is from renewable resources.
I am committed to ensuring you have the right incentives for low carbon growth.
And unfortunately, the wind industry has sold them that they will provide that energy.
And I want to work with you to accelerate deployment and technical advances so we can meet renewable energy targets.
I'm extremely concerned that the lights will go out. They are, the former government and the present coalition seem absolutely intent on pursuing wind turbines as their only option for renewable energy.
We will continue to provide clear signals to the market through the renewable obligation and feed-in tariffs, for example.
On the face of it, they can generate the electricity in terms of their installed capacity, but we're now starting to see the figures coming through from the past few years of what these current wind farms are actually achieving, and in most cases, they're achieving far less than the developers claimed they would achieve when they were applying for planning permission.
Wind farm critics have challenged the research, statistics and argument of the government and wind industry. But how have the government responded?
I do think the government needs to do a better job of getting out there, and we all do, of saying it's sort of socially unacceptable to block, to be against wind turbines in your area. I think that needs to become the sort of view.
So thank you all very much for coming, and please join the Not Stupid campaign.
Thanks very much.
I think that it's only when it comes close to you that you actually look at the facts. If other people had the time to look at the facts, I can't see that they wouldn't agree with the people who live next to them. I'm not saying not in my backyard. As far as wind energy is concerned, I don't think it's the appropriate form of energy that we should be looking at.
Most of the advice that goes to the government comes from the wind industry and the people advocating the wind farm developments, and it seems to me much of that evidence is somewhat partial, to say the least.
Npower told us what the savings were on that site, the CO2 savings, which were so far exaggerated that a campaigner took them to the Advertising Standards Authority over it and won. And it is that sort of thing, but there's nothing that says that any developer has to tell the truth to the local authority. How ridiculous is that?
Government ministers have criticised wind farm campaigners who have sought to challenge wind farm developments and have labelled them antisocial. Is this true? Have wind farm campaigners been allowed to challenge the UK's wind energy programme in a fair and democratic process?
The small local campaign groups have no funding, we've got no vested interests, we're continually vilified, and you know that there's an agenda which has already been determined, even though lip service is paid to the planning procedures. Violations occur, and yet the public authorities don't seem to be held to them. There's a lot of hypocrisy in the whole process.
The developers have deep pockets, and they cost in the costs of an appeal in their proposals, whereas the local authorities have limited resources, both physically and financially, and the local people have even less resources. And the problem is, as more and more wind farms are proposed in a certain area, the resources of the local authority cannot cope, and the resources of the campaigners have difficulty coping.
The whole system is biased in favour of the industry. It's very expensive. You know, you've got to use experts, you've got to use good legal people. It's no good going to a planning inquiry with a load of emotive arguments. You've got to have expert testimony, and they cost, you know, anywhere between £200, £300, £400 an hour. From the developer's point of view, I mean, I'm sure it's cost them a great deal of money. It's probably cost them £1 million or £2 up to now for all their assessments and going through 2 public inquiries and the like. And the irony, of course, is that most of that money is coming from our electricity bills.
This film has shown that there are a range of good arguments against wind farm development. Concerns about the effects and shortcomings of wind energy at national and local levels have been ignored by government and have been denied fair treatment in legal and planning processes. Meanwhile, governments continue to promise large sums to wind farm developers who promise in return to help them meet their political targets. According to some campaigners, this amounts to a new form of politics: wind powerism.
The headline is the right to making vetoes make uncertainty in the wind power business. There is a rule in the Swedish legislation giving the municipalities the right to say no to a wind power project without any arguments, and it has been used. And I mean, this is an instrument of democracy. So this headline and the ideas behind is a direct attack upon the democratic process. In the time of enlightenment, there's a separation of powers into 3 areas: the political power, which is sitting in the parliament, and then you have the government to carry out the decisions made by the parliament, and then you have the court and the police. That's why it's so serious when a minister decides what the court decision should be, because the things are strictly separated from each other. But not when we talk about wind powerism. Then we have a fourth power. We have a fourth power: the press, the newspapers, the television and the radio, controlling the other 3 parts of power. But when we talk about wind power and wind powerism, they have forgotten to be critical. What we see is an industry with enormous resources. They can buy the best public relations experts, communications experts, and they put an enormous pressure on the government. At the other side, you have a population which have got no information. The role of the press is to ensure that the readers, the listeners, the people who look at television get correct, perspectivized information. They don't talk, they don't have political discussions about the consequences for the victims. It's an area of silence. The press can easily see if something is wrong in the third world, when there is a dictator like in Sudan, or they can be critical to, for example, Putin in Russia, but they can't see what is happening in their own country.